I'm glad to see the Davises back safely.
Thank you. Well, I was going to say we're glad to be home with our family.
And it's Greg,
Part of the sympathy list are the Jerry Story family.
Jerry Story. Okay, family sympathy.
You said the wind's picking up, right?
Mhm.
But just hope LA doesn't have any more fires.
Well, they can. That's out yonder. Don't worry about them. West Coast.
Well, they already had enough.
Yeah, they've had enough, but we got to worry about our area here. Okay. All right, and then of course anybody we need to call on, be sure to let the deacons and elders know. Any other requests? Anything else we need to? No. Bobby, would you have our prayer, please?
Father, we thank you, Lord, once again for this good that you give us to come in, worship and praise your holy name. Father, Father, as we go and ask prayer for each one of these people that has different issues, sickness and whatever. And Father, we're glad to know that you're a great physician, that you can heal. And Lord, we pray that you touch each one. Be with us, watch over us, keep us close to you. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.
Thank you. Well, tonight we're going to compare and contrast Islam with Christianity. I've got quite a bit of information on this. In order to study, Islam is not something we've had to deal with much until this, past the 1970s or thereabouts started coming up. Prior to that, they were pretty quiet, except in the 4th century, when they conquered most of the Middle East, and actually, in the name of Islam, had planned on conquering Europe and got stopped in Hungary. It was the place that they got defeated. But in terms of a religion, it is a religion of one God. The term Allah means God, and they only believe in one God. And how that compared to Christianity, we believe in one God, but we believe in the Trinity. And they define that as polytheism. In other words, because we think of God in three persons, they think that we are infidels because we worship three people instead of the one God. So and when you look things up, now be careful if you go on the internet and you look up comparing, contrasting Islam, or just look up Islam and look up Muslims, that kind of stuff. It comes up first in your search, and when it comes up, it really shows it in a very positive light, a very positive light. So when you're reading that, so people who aren't exposed to Christianity, who don't understand Christianity, have a lot of problems with that. And they compared a few things, like Christianity has the God in three. It's echoing a little bit. It's still echoing some. Can y'all hear the echo? Or is it just me? Maybe it's just me. Yeah. Maybe it's in my head. Sometimes I hear voices in my head, but they don't tell me to do anything dangerous. They believe in the only book. Their book is the Quran, and our book is the Bible. The Quran supposedly existed prior to the giver, which was Muhammad. Muhammad is considered the latest and actually only significant prophet of Allah, whereas we recognize different prophets from God and different edicts from God. Muhammad, and what he said, he was the only prophet of God. And the Quran is supposed to be, the Bible is supposed to be derived from the Quran, and all the other books that people study that in Christianity were supposed to be derived from the Quran. Although the Quran wasn't gathered and written about significantly until about the 4th century. Okay, so when you're looking at these things and you're comparing them, you have to be careful about what is the truth and what isn't the truth. Prayer is very important to the Muslims, and they all have to say the center. What is similar to us, it's called the Shahada, which is the sinner's prayer. You've heard of the sinner's prayer, but this is the Shahada, which is the Islamic sinner's prayer. And they have to do that on a regular basis, and they have to pray certain very specific prayers at very specific times. They pray in the morning, at noon, supper time, bedtime, sundown. And you have to pray with your head against the ground, facing toward Mecca, which is always to the east. Okay? And so the ritualism is very important to Islam, extremely important. And the prayers that they do are all straightforward. That's what you have to do. You have to repeat that same prayer. And that's compared to Catholicism, to the rosary, that kind of thing. So when you look this up, they compare it. So it's like the rosary. Well, it isn't, but that's what they want you to compare it to. And there's only one way you can get to heaven, and it is by following all these edicts. There's 5 different edicts you're supposed to follow. 1 is recognizing only Allah. 2 is doing the sinner's prayer. 3 is doing the prayers every day you're supposed to do. Charity, fasting, and pilgrimage. Charity is really important, but the charity is selective. If you're very wealthy, you're expected to give more, and you're suspected to do things like help them build a mosque. You're expected to do that kind of thing. So charity to the like widows and orphans is okay, but it's not as good as building a mosque. So whereas we're told we're supposed to take care of the widows and orphans. That's what we're supposed to do, charity. Fasting. The 9th month in the Islamic calendar is called Ramadan. Now you've heard of that. It's a holy month. You fast during daylight. And then you're supposed to cultivate a sense of gratitude. So you don't eat during the daylight, but after sundown you can eat. Now they have some various opinions on whether you can drink or not and what you're supposed to drink. You're not supposed to drink any kind of fermented beverages, and there's a variety of other things you're not supposed to do. But they have that fasting thing is really important. And then the pilgrimage is really important. That's going to Mecca and Medina. That was the journey that Muhammad did from Mecca to Medina. Well, there's this giant black box in Mecca that's supposed to be very sacred, but it actually was a pagan idol that was being worshipped prior to Muhammad coming in. And when Muhammad came in, I'll back up and talk about more him in a minute. When he came in, he defeated the people in these different places and said, okay, if you worship my God, I won't cut your head off. But if you don't worship my God, we're going to cut your head off. So they talked about it for a while, and they figured, well, it's better to live. He also had his armies. The purpose of the armies was to ambush the caravans that were carrying a great deal of materials, spices, gold, all kinds of stuff that came through that area. Mecca is in Saudi Arabia, okay, and that whole area was very wealthy at that time. So what he would do is, okay, I'll absolve you from any sins if you go and attack the caravan and bring me back half of it, and you keep half of it, and it won't be a sin. Because you're giving it to me, which is charity. And then I'm going to distribute as needed. So that was a pretty good deal too. So they thought, okay, we can do that. And so that's how it began. They recognized Jesus as a prophet and as a Messiah who ascended but did not die and was not really resurrected because he didn't die, and he didn't die on the cross. But they recognized Jesus as a prophet. They recognized Abraham as the father of everyone. The Arabs claim heritage all the way back to Abraham. Remember, they're supposed to be the lineage of his handmaiden. Okay, and remember in the Bible, and we can look it up if you want to, but those descendants are supposed to be always difficult, and that was given in the Bible. So they recognize that part of it. Now let's back up a little bit and talk a little bit more about Muhammad. You're not supposed to come up with any images of Muhammad. You can't draw a picture of him. You can't have a statue. You can't do it. You can just refer to him. And you can't have a statue or anything referring to Allah. They're too holy to have an image given and be considered graven. So you can talk about them. And you can only read the Quran in Arabic. Now, they may translate it into English, but that's to help you. But then you have to learn and study and do the original Arabic. So the Quran can only be understood and only believed if you study it in Arabic. Okay, unlike our Christian Bible that we translated to a bunch of things. But I guess when some people say that it's only the King James Version is the only one you're supposed to go with, I guess there's a little commonality there of some sort. I don't think we need to all study Old English and do that, but that's okay. So Muhammad was a camel herder. He raised camels for this lady and took care of her camels and did all that was necessary to take care of the camels. And he went into a cave, and in that cave he met an angel. And the angel was telling him all the information about the Quran. And when this first happened, he was very frightened and went out and he told the lady he was working for, I think that might have been the devil because of what they were saying. And she says, no, that's not the devil. That's one of God's angels. And you need to listen to what he says. And now you're going to be the center of our religion. So he thought, okay, not a bad idea. So the problem with the Quran is it was never written down fully except in bits and pieces. There's different parts of it that were written down at different times over a couple of centuries, and they were supposed to be revelations. And they were all supposed to be tied back, though, to Muhammad, that the Quran existed. He just took a while to gather it all up. And there were some written down on sheepskin, some written down on animal bones, some written down on wood, and then a group of imams, these are the leaders in the Islam religion, got together and collected all this and created the Quran. But it existed before they created it, they just gathered up the information. A little confusing, no doubt. But to be a certified Muslim with a chance of going to heaven, you have to do all 5 things, including the pilgrimage. Okay? And there's different names for all these different things that they do. But you have to do these things, and that's why at certain times of the year, you may have heard about the riots that occurred at Mecca, at these different holy places that they went to, because there's literally thousands upon thousands of pilgrims there, and the whole purpose is you're supposed to go up and touch or kiss this giant black rock. And that completes your pilgrimage. So if you do that, you've done along with all these other things I mentioned, you have done what Muhammad did, and as a result, you might get a chance to go to heaven. But there's only 2 ways to get to paradise. Now, first of all, paradise for the Muslim is not what we think of paradise. Christianity thinks of paradise as being with God. No tear will shed. You'll be happy. You'll be comfortable. You'll be with God, who is total goodness. And we've had glimpses of heaven in Revelation. So the paradise that the Muslims have is an earthly paradise. If you get to go there, you get to have all the earthly pleasures that you were denied before when you were on earth. You can drink as much as you want. You can have relations with any women you want. As a matter of fact, most of the women there are virgins, and so you're the first one with them. And the problem with that, of course, is who selects the virgins and where they come from. Well, they don't talk about that. I assume it's probably all you heathens that they select. But they don't have an explanation for that. And that you get to go there if Allah decides that you're okay, that you can go. But if Allah decides you've done all these things you're supposed to do, but if he's in a bad mood, you don't get to go there. You have to go to hell. And hell is very much like our hell, a place of torment, and there's different levels. The other way you get to go to heaven, you get to directly go to paradise, is if you die in service to Allah. Who determines that? Well, the imams determine that. So if you're defending the faith, if you're defending Islam, and you die, doesn't matter what else happens, but you die, then you get to go directly to paradise. Now, people are taught this from the time that they're infants. And it's almost a fatalistic society in a way that if something bad happens, they always say, Inshallah, God's will. And because of that, it creates some difficulties for living in these Arabic countries. One is, if you have a stairway that's built, it's a very steep stairway, and you don't have any handrails, and the kid falls off of it and breaks his neck and dies, Inshallah, God's will. And they do some really interesting things. I was talking to some of our friends who were in that part of the world in wartime, and they would carry their guns loaded and the safeties off in the vehicle with them. Of course, if you're bouncing around in a vehicle with an automatic weapon with the safety off, bad things can happen. And they did. And it was, well, Inshallah, it was God's will. And so anything that happens to you was God's will. That any situation where you weren't planning for was God's will. And so that's how they look at the world. And it's God's will that you didn't eat today. It was God's will that you didn't do this. Or it's very, and so it's a flexible religion that way, very flexible. And so the other way, of course, is defending the faith. And they're taught from, like I said, from a very young age that that's what you do. It's God's will. God is great. This is what you do. And you have to do all these prayers and stuff. But if you die in service, and that's where they get the suicide bombers. Now, there are two different primary sects of Islam. There's other smaller sects, but the two big primary sects are Sunnis and Shias. The Sunnis are the Saudis. The Shias are the Iranians. Okay? Now, Iran, interestingly enough, is Persia. It's ancient Persia, is the Persians. And they were converted over to Islam over a period of time. And so they have a different, their religion, their Shia religion is different in that they're waiting for the 12th Imam to come. Now, these are all the different leaders that they track back through the centuries. And the special one is the 12th Imam. When the 12th Imam comes, that's the end of time. And then they're supposed to encourage that, and then everybody that believes in the 12th Imam gets to go to paradise. So if you're protecting the faith and you're doing what the 12th Imam tells you to do, then you're going to go to paradise. But only as he brings about the end of the world. And politically speaking, that's a little scary because they're working on the atom bomb right on their bomb now, on the atomic bomb. And some people think that once they get it, and the 12th Imam shows up, the whole purpose is to bring about the end of the world. And so that's what they pray for. Now the Sunnis are a little different. They don't quite believe that approach. So they don't get along well. And so they've been fighting each other for centuries over there. And it was all tribal, and depending on which one lined up with which one. And during that time, so they don't like each other much. The only thing they agree on is that Christianity should be a branch of Islam. And if you don't convert to Islam, that you need to die. So they agree on that. Now that you get three opportunities if you're captured and you're a heathen. Now that means if you're not a Muslim. Doesn't mean if you're a Hindu, or if you're a Christian, or if you're a Buddhist, or if you're a Baptist, or whatever. They give you an opportunity to convert to Islam. If you don't, I give you three opportunities. On the third opportunity, if you don't accept it, they're required, according to the Quran, to kill you. And the most efficient way is lop your head off. And that's what they do. They're required to do that. And the person doing that is defending the faith. If anything happens to them in the future, they get to go to paradise. So you have people lining up to lop people's head off. And then they do the same thing with the suicide bombers. If you're doing it, and the Iman blesses you and teaches you and tells you that you're doing this to defend the faith, and you die in that process, you get to go to paradise. So it's there's different parts of a religion that's more like the charity, the fasting, the prayers, the pilgrimages. All those things are important as to get to do the religion, but that don't make sure you get to heaven or paradise. I should say, I shouldn't use the term heaven. I should use the term paradise because that's what they call it. And so, because then Allah decides if you're good enough or not, that you've done the right things. So you get on the escalator to paradise if you die defending the faith. Otherwise, you got to hang around and wait for a while and see if that's okay. So it's that's kind of it in a nutshell in terms of comparing how it operates versus how we operate. And it wasn't such a big religion until a guy by the name of Suleiman came along. Now this is during the Crusades. Back and forth between the Christians, the Crusaders that came into Jerusalem to save it, and the Muslims at that time controlled it. And it was back and forth like 3 different times that they were defeated, the Crusaders were defeated, and the Muslims. And then this guy by the name of Suleiman came along. And he used the Muslim religion to build his army. So he built his army with huge numbers of men by promising them if they died attacking Jerusalem and killing the Christians, that they would go to heaven. They got their imams to go to paradise. So he was able to defeat the Christians, the Crusaders, and form his armies and move into Europe. He almost made it all the way into Europe. So that entire area was controlled by this guy named Suleiman. And he's a very strong character in their history. And that carried on up even into the 14th century. Well, in the 20th century, actually the late part of the 19th century and the 20th century, the protectors of the religion consisted of 2 groups. One was the Saudis. That's Saudi Arabia. That's where Mecca is and Medina. That's where the pilgrimages has to occur. So their job was to protect the pilgrims and to help them do their pilgrimages. So they had a banking system. And so you get to bring your money there and you get to pay them, and they took care of your money for you for a price. And then you get to go back and forth, and you got safe transportation. That didn't always work very well, but that was their main job until oil was discovered. And then after that, their main job has been spending oil petrodollars. But during that time, in the late 19th century, like 1880, 1870, that's when the Turkmen Empire, the Ottoman Empire, the Turkmen came along. That was Turkey, which used to be Asia Minor, which used to be a center of Christian belief. And the Turks came along and dealt their empire, and they pushed down into Iran, into Syria, Iraq. Now, all the Iran, Iraq, Syria, Jordan, all those areas didn't exist at that time. It was all tribal areas with different small areas. And the Turks came in and took control and put everybody under the thumb. So even though they were all Muslim, and now they didn't recognize Shia or Sunni, they just were separate. And then at the end of World War I, they were defeated. That's when the British defeated them in World War I. And as a result, the Turkish Empire, the Ottoman Empire, collapsed. And that's when the British came in and took over. And then they separated out all these different areas. They promised the Arabs who were fighting the Turks that they would give them their own countries. So at that point in time, the English, and everybody's heard of Lawrence of Arabia. Okay, that's the movie, World War I, that's the one. But he was the guy who helped the Arabs defeat the Turks. So the Turks were the Axis power, part of their Axis power, and the English, of course, were the Allied powers in World War I. And so the Arabs helped them defeat the Turks because they had to pull a lot of troops down to deal with the Arabs. So once the British then basically were in control of that area, they divided that part of the world up into different countries. And that's why you got this odd look. Have you ever looked at a map of the Middle East of these odd looking countries where everything is? It's all divided up, and you've got Palestine, and you've got Jordan, and you've got Syria, and you've got Iraq, and all these different places are all kind of funny. Well, the British did that. And they were the ones that put the people in power in that part of the world. So in the 1950s, after World War II, the British started separating out and giving them power. That's when the Jewish people wanted their own homeland, but the British didn't want them to have that. They wanted to keep Palestine Arab, and the Jews were moving in. So the British were actually fighting against the Jews at that time. But they still developed. As a matter of fact, the Jews wanted to develop a state with the Arabs. The Arabs didn't have anything to do with it. That's the so-called Palestinians. They're very warlike people, very dangerous. So that resulted in Israel showing up, the homeland of Israel, in Palestine. And so all these different areas that were divided up, it was the British that did that. Okay? So now when you see that part of the world and all these places, all these kingdoms are made up. Jordan is a kingdom. They have a king. Okay? Saudi Arabia is a kingdom. Dubai is a kingdom. All these, if you'll look at the map, all these little places are kingdoms. They're not democracies. And it's because they were all tribal to begin with. So when you look at that part of the world, the only uniting factor is the fact that they're Muslim. Not all of them are Arab. Part of the Iranians are Persian. The Jordanians are not Arabs. Palestinians are Arabs. The Egyptians are not Arabs. Okay? So you have this group then of Arabs who founded the Muslim religion and converted everybody else to Muslim through the sword, of course. But they all have their own claims to why they are Muslims. So until they found a lot of oil over there, nobody really cared. They've been fighting each other for a long time, all these tribes. And everybody's heard of the Bedouins. The Bedouins were the nomads, and they claimed to be direct descendants of Abraham. Okay? And they're kind of semi-Muslim. All right? But they go where they want to. And they live in the Jordanian and Assyrian deserts where they live, most of that place. So you can thank the British for all this mess now. And of course the Israelis picked the only place in the Middle East that didn't have oil, except off their coast. But they're surrounded by all of these different Arab nations because that's how the British divided it. So that's a short history. It's a lot more complicated than that. But I thought I would try to compare Christianity, Islam, historical, geopolitical, and try to package it up to help us understand it a little bit better. And any question, I know you're confused now. I've got you totally confused at this point. So when you see all this stuff going on, you can look at it and think about it maybe a little differently now when you see what's going on. And so the two main sects, and there are other sects too, okay, but those are the two biggies because they've the ones got the money. There's a lot of oil in Saudi Arabia, a lot of oil in Iran and Iraq too, but the Iranians and the Iraqis fought each other for many years. And part of that was over the oil. And then, of course, when Hussein took over, his neighbor and caused the war we had, it was about the oil. That's what it was about. It wasn't about religion, it was about the oil. And so if they didn't have all that money, and all that oil, we probably didn't care what they did to each other. Yeah. Any questions about that? I know that's a lot of confusion, a lot of stuff, a lot of history, but that's where we are today.
Dr. Taylor, on the Koran you were talking about, is it written sort of like our Bible? Or is it written?
In a way, it's verses and chapters, and and you'd have to spend a lot more time reading it than I have because it gets real confusing. But you have different parts of it that contradict the other. Okay? If a stranger comes to town and he comes to your house and he asks for something to eat, you're supposed to feed him, bring him in, and protect him, even if he's not Muslim. So if you're protecting him and taking care of him, and other Muslims come to get him, you're supposed to protect him. But after a certain length of time, and I'm not sure what it is, if he don't convert to Islam, then you can cut his head off. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, you can protect him from your neighbors who want to cut his head off.
Well, that way they can go to paradise.
Yeah. Yeah.
Protect the neighbors.
Yeah. So it's you're protecting the faith. Okay? And you got to remember that up through roughly the early part of the 14th century, they had a lot of educated people. They had their own alphabet, their own language, all written language, and there's a lot of people that were educated. After the 14th century, all that went downhill after they got defeated when they tried to go into Europe. Now, women are property; they're chattel. They're not allowed to go to school. They're not allowed to be seen by themselves. If they're out in public, they have to be with a male relative. Okay, they can't drive. They can't hold office. But you'll see some of these more modern ones will allow them to hold office and do things. But in the very strong fundamentalist people, that's not possible.
So they weren't like that previous before?
About the 14th century, yeah. After they got defeated in Europe. But there's verses in the Quran that support that. Support making women secondary citizens. And you can have as many wives as you can afford. So that's another thing to do.
What about covering their hair and their face?
Well, the very strictest fundamentalists, the only thing you can see is the eyes. And that's so they don't fall over themselves. But everything has to be covered head to toe, all the way to the ground, actually. It's supposed to be covered. And even now, it's interesting though, before a girl hits adolescence, she can wear almost nothing, and they don't care. But once she starts developing, that's to wear the whole garb, and can be betrothed to marry someone as soon as they're born or before they're born. Okay, so you can be wife number 3 or 4 or 2 or whatever. And it's a little confusing there, but they can do that. So if you're a female and all the male members of your family are either dead or gone, you're just out of luck. You can't even go to the market without a male member of the family. Okay, and that one of the big problems in Afghanistan was we were developing schools. Girls can't go to school, can't learn to read and write. That's the fundamentalist part. So and so you've got the extremes and you've got the more modern, and they want you to believe that it's okay, that it's not a bad religion. And I had some patients who were Muslims at one time, and I was talking to one of the ladies who was there, and she was dressed in a hijab, but she didn't have everything covered. And I've seen a little kid who was half wild. And taking care of him. And she asked me if I was Christian. I said yes. I said, I understand, we have differences of opinion and religions, but my religion requires me to love you and help you. If you need something, I'm required to help you do that. what's your religion required to do to me? And she looked real funny for a few minutes. And I said, if I read it correctly, if I don't convert, you're supposed to kill me. She just dropped her head. Okay? So that's the way it works. But she was more modern. She had a head thing and all this kind of stuff and dressed in that. But why women would convert to that is beyond my belief. I don't know why you would do that. My wife would not do well. So, yeah. She don't even like to be told anything. I don't know. Okay.
Joe, what you were saying about, Britain having such a role in dividing everything up, now kind of makes clear, if you don't ever get a chance to go to these countries, just go to the Royal British Museum in London and spend about 3 days, because they've got antiquities from all over the world. And so they took little bits and pieces home with them. I don't know how much they've had to give back, but now I understand why there was such a large section
Yeah.
for the Middle East.
That's right. It was actually part of the British Empire. See, the British Empire existed all the way up through World War II, colonization. So they took in that part of the world, and they kind of took what they wanted. And in one way, it's kind of a good thing because they preserved a lot of stuff that would have been destroyed. They took a lot of stuff out of Egypt, a lot of stuff. Napoleon did that too. He took over that part of the world. Napoleon defeated the Egyptians and the Libyans and that area. And then the British defeated him, so they took that over area too. So all that area of North Africa was controlled by the British. Okay, so the British control, like I said, the sun never set on the British Empire. And they controlled all of that. And it was only after World War II that they started backing off on this stuff and giving these places independence. So it's we were unusual that we separated from the empire early. Okay, and so yeah, that's a big deal, but kind of good in one way because they saved a lot of stuff. But the other thing, they took what they wanted. If they wanted it, they got it. Yeah. So blame the British; it's all their fault. Yeah. All right. Any other questions? I hope we're a little more educated on this. There's a lot more to it, let me tell you, a lot more to it. But this is just we scraped the surface so people, you can kind of, when you look at the news now, I'm hoping it'll help you when you see the news just to understand a little bit more what's going on. And we are the big Satan. The United States is. That's why they hate the Jews, and they hate us as much because we helped them establish their country. Because the Jews do not belong as far as they're concerned. Okay, that's their birthright, that area, and it doesn't make any difference what you think. Okay, all right. Floyd, would you close us out, please?
Heavenly Father, we want to thank you for tonight, Lord. The message brought to us, Lord, made open our eyes and love you that much more, Father, for you did create us, Lord, and create us in a way that we could love you and love others, Father. And we do love all those, and we do pray to God that they would come to know you the right way, Father. For we know just here in our community, Lord, many do not know you, and Lord, may we go seek them now and tell them about you and what you've done for us and show them your love through us, Lord. May we do it boldly, Father, because we know, Lord, the time is coming. And when it does, Lord, it'll be too late for those that don't know you. Tonight, Lord, we want to pray for those that couldn't be here, Lord, and I'm sure there's many more to be added to the prayer list, Father. We just pray, for we know you know every need. We just pray that you'll touch them in a special way. And again, Lord, thank you. May we give you all the glory and honor in Christ's name. Amen.
If you get a chance to go back and read a little bit about Hagar and read that prediction, that'll open your eyes a little bit what's going on today. Yeah.